Hi friends, welcome to Amazon World. So in this video, I'll be explaining how to do caselet number 8. So let's go through the question. Mr. Lakshman Rao, the owner of Guider Inc., provides the following information regarding the production process of a particular fountain pen called the Zimbo. After careful consideration, he has noted that a group of workers usually consists of 10 skilled, 5 semi-skilled, and 5 unskilled workers paid at standard hourly rates of Rs 5, Rs 3.20, and Rs 2.80 respectively. In a normally working week of 40 hours, the group is expected to produce 1000 units of Zimbo. During March 2022, adjustments were to be made to the actual composition of the group due to non-availability of labor and actually consisted of 30 skilled, 4 semi-skilled and 3 unskilled employees. Actual wages paid were Rs 4.80, Rs 3.40 and Rs 2.60 respectively. 2 hours were lost due to abnormal idle time and 960 units of Zimbo were produced. Mr. Lakshman Rao is worried about the variances in labor cost and asks his friend Mr. Shiva, who is a cost accountant, to submit to him a report regarding the labor cost variances. So they have given us some budgeted data as well as standard rates as well, and the working week. The working week contained 40 hours. So it is actually a fixed hour. So that means for actual data calculation and as for standard as well, and in case of standard as well, we'll be considering this 40 hours. Okay, and the actual production was 960 units, and they're saying that there was an idle time. 2 hours is idle time. So for each employees, there will be an idle time of 2, and we have to calculate according to it. So we have to calculate the hours according to it. That's it. So now let's see how this question have to be solved. I have already wrote down the data which was available to us from the question. So this is a standard 2. We know that 40 hours is the entire week, and there was 2 hours idle time for each of the employees, and this is the actual number of employees for skilled, semi-skilled and unskilled, and they expected, that means the budgeted units was 1000 units. Okay, the budgeted units, the units which they expected to make was 1000 units, but they ended up producing only 960 units. Now let's just go straight to the calculations. First thing, as I told you, we have to first calculate the standard hours. So how we are going to calculate standard hours, that's what I'm going to show you here. See, skilled hours, semi-skilled hours, unskilled hours. We have to find all 3 of them. We know that standard, or you can say the employees, the standard data which was given us in the question, there were 10 skilled employees, 5 semi-skilled employees and 5 unskilled employees. So we have to calculate that. Since we have told us that the entire week had 40 hours, we have to multiply it with this 40. Since we have to get to know for each person 40 hours will be there. So 10 are there in skilled, 10 employees are there in skilled workers, included are 10 workers are included in skilled employees. So we have to multiply 10 into 40 in order to get the total hours of this entire 10 people which is included in the skilled labor. Okay, so we got them as 400 hours, and for semi-skilled we'll be having 200 hours, and for unskilled we'll be having 200 hours. But there is a problem, because in this question, the standard data is given to us actually in the basis of this budgeted unit. We want to find, that is, this data will be on the basis of 1000 units. But in actual, how much units were produced? 960 units were produced, right? So we have to convert them to 960. So you'll be asking me why. So I would suggest you to go see my basic videos first, especially for this labor variances. I have uploaded the video in English. I know my English is a bit low. My first language is not English, so you might have a bit of confusions here and there. But if you're having confusions, you can just comment below and I will be replying you back, sure. Okay, so we have to convert them to 960 units. Let me explain why we have to convert it to 960. It is because standard, budget, we might use these 2 words for the same purpose at times. But when we are going too deep into the topic, we'll get to understand that this budgeted had its own meaning and this standard have its own meaning. So the meanings and all have explained in the basics video, the very first video which I have uploaded in English regarding the topic labor variances, or this variance analysis chapter. Okay, so that the very first we have to go through in order to get what is the difference between standard and budgeted and all. So let me get into it. So for both standard and actual, we'll be taking the actual output. For the calculations and all. Since standard is for actual production, standard data is actually the data for actual production, or you can say actual output on the basis of budget. What we are going to do is that we are going to convert these hours into, since this is based on the 1000 units, we have to convert them into actual output, since standard is for actual output, or you can say actual production. So this is how we are going to calculate skilled hours. That means there was 400 hours, and this 400 was skilled labor was for 1000 units, was to make 1000 units, but we actually are making 960 units, so we are going to convert them, and we got 384 hours. When it gets to semi-skilled hours, the same thing, the same calculation. That means 200 hours was there, but this 200 hours of semi-skilled labor was to make 1000 units. Okay, but we have only made 960 units, so we are going to convert this as well. So same answer will be getting for unskilled as well. So 384 hours for skilled, now 92 hours for semi-skilled, and 192 hours for unskilled will be used. So this is how we calculated the standard data, and the standard rate we can take exactly from the question itself. Okay, there is no change in that, and I have just multiplied it, and I have just took a sum of this amount and this as well. We'll be needing it in the further calculations. And in case of actual also we have to do. So in case of actual, what we have to multiply? 30 into 40, 4 into 40, and 3 into 40, you will get 520, 160 and 120 hours. So in sum, if we are going to take the sum, we will get 800 hours here, and we are taking that actual rate as it is, exactly the way it is. So and after multiplying it and summing it up, you will get 3352 as the amount total. Okay, so we will be needing this data to solve the variance analysis. So we are going to start calculating. First thing that comes in our way is labor cost variance, right? So for labor cost variance, it is very easy. It's a standard cost, and 3352 is the actual cost. So once we subtract standard cost minus actual cost, we'll get to 80 adverse. So why it is adverse? So let me come into it. Let me say we shouldn't actually completely depend upon the negative and the positive signs which we get in the calculator. We have to actually know what's the concept behind it, because when we are going to calculate yield variance and all, we might get minus. We might get minus in the calculator, but it might end up as favorable. Okay, so please don't depend on this minus and positive and negative in order to classify them as favorable and adverse. Okay, so you have to first get to understand what is the concept behind it. Okay, so let me get into it. See, standard cost, the cost which we have calculated on the basis of budget for the actual was 3072. It was only 3072, but in reality, what happened? 3352 that incurred, right? So what we have to do? We have to subtract it, and you will get the adverse case, because the case in the reality, the cost was actually high. So it is an adverse case. Fine. So that is why labor cost variance is an adverse. Now let's go through the other variances. The first thing we are going to, the next thing which we are going to calculate is labor efficiency variance. So once we are going to calculate labor efficiency variance, there is something more you have to know about actual hours. So when we calculated the actual hours, we just, what would you do? We multiplied 30 into 40, 4 into 40 and 3 into 40, right? But that is just the hours which we are actually paying. So we have to actually differentiate between the actual hours worked and actual hours which is used in order to calculate the wages. Okay, there is two points there you have to understand. That means in this question there is idle hours. Idle hours means the hours which they are not using properly. We can say they are not using that particular hour productively. They are not doing anything, just sitting simply. So it is not so there is no productivity in that hours. So we have to subtract those hours from the actual hours, from the total actual hours, and we'll get the actual hours paid. So now in order to calculate labor efficiency variance, since in this variance we are calculating the efficiency of the labor, we have to take actual hours work. Actual hours worked is what we have to take in order to calculate the labor efficiency variance. So how are we going to do that? Let's just find out. So first thing we are going to do is actual hours worked. How we are going to calculate? Let me explain. Since in the question they have told us that the week had 40 hours, right? And they have told us that each employees are losing 2 hours. That means they have 2 hours idle time. Right, so we have to subtract it from this 40. So 40 hours is for 1 person. That means 40 hours is for 1 person for 1 week. We have to know and we know that 2 hours is the idle time for one person for 1 week. So how we are going to do that? In a week, what is the actual hours worked? 40 minus 38 for one person. Now we have to know how much is the total. That means there is lot of employees, right? In the actual data is 13, 4 and 3. We have to calculate what is the actual hours worked for the skilled labor as per the actual data. Okay, so 13 is the actual number of employees which is there in skilled labor, and we are going to calculate it with 38. We are going to multiply it with 38 because we have to know what is the actual hours worked by the skilled labor. So what we did here, 40 minus 2, you will get 38. 38 into 13, you get to understand the skilled labor worked for 494 hours. And the semi-skilled work for 152 hours. How? 4 into 32, 4 into 38. And unskilled work for 140 hours. How? 3 into 38, you will get 140 hours. So I'm just summing it up for the further calculation, 760 hours. Okay, so this is how we are finding actual hours worked. Okay, so we go to understand what is actual hours worked. So let's calculate labor efficiency now. We all know what is the formula for calculating labor efficiency variance. Standard hours minus actual hours into standard rate. That is how I explained it, right? Standard hours minus actual hours into standard rate. But here you have to keep in note that since we are going to calculate the labor efficiency variance, we have to take actual hours worked. Okay, actual hours worked, not the hours which we have calculated in the beginning of this calculation. I have to keep that in your mind. So standard hours we can take as it is, as we have calculated in the very beginning. Let me explain how it is to be calculated. 384 minus 494 into 5. 192 minus 152 into 3.2. Likewise, 192 minus 140 into 2.8. You have to do this in order to get efficiency variance. So for the first one, we'll get 550 adverse. Next one, we'll get 128 favorable. Next one, we'll get 280.4 favorable. So once we are taking the net effect, we'll get 203.6 adverse. Okay, so we now understood how to calculate labor efficiency variance. Now let's go with the labor ideal variance. So let me explain how to calculate labor ideal variance. Before this I have already explained in the basics video. I'm just showing this to refresh your mind. So actual hours minus actual hours worked you have to do first, and then we have to multiply it with standard rate. It is very easy. Since we know what is actual hour, in the very beginning we have already calculated it, and we have calculated actual hours worked as well. So after doing this, multiply it with standard rates and you will get labor idle time variance. And the other thing is, every time we are calculating the labor idle time variance, it is always adverse. Since idle time is not a very good thing, we are not actually making use of that hours, so it is to be considered as adverse. Fine. So we are going to calculate that labor idle variance, actual hours minus actual hours worked. So actual hours means this is the hours which we have calculated in here, 520 minus actual hours worked. Actual hours worked here is 494, 152, 140, right? So 520 minus 494 into standard rate into 5 you have to do, and you will get labor idle variance for skilled labor, that is 130. And in case of here and here, for semi-skilled, 160 minus 152 into 3.2, you will get 25.6. In case of unskilled, 120 minus 140 into 2.8, you will get 16.8. Once we are taking the sum, we will get 172.4, and we have to consider it as adverse. So the next variance which we have to calculate is labor rate variance. So labor rate variance is simple, but you might have another kind of, there is another thing which you have to keep note in here as well. In labor efficiency variance, we took actual hours worked. But in the case of labor rate variance is it is an analysis of the wages which we are going to give the labor, or you can say the employees. So we are taking an assumption that we will be paying the laborers for the total hours. We will be not subtracting the idle hours. We will be just giving them wages for the total hours. Okay, so that is the assumption we are going to take. So in that case, here in labor rate variance, we have to consider the actual hours which was there in the beginning of this video. That means this hours is what we have to take once we are going to calculate labor rate variance. Okay, so once again I'm explaining it. Once again I'm telling this point, that is, in the case of labor rate variance, we have to take actual hours. Actual hours means this actual hours, not the actual hours worked. Actual hours worked is considered for two things, for two efficiencies, especially for idle variances, and the next is for labor efficiency variance. Since labor efficiency variance is the analysis of the efficiency of the labor, we have to get to know what is the actual hours they actually worked, right? So we have to take actual hours worked in that case. And also in case of branches of this labor efficiency, there is branches for labor efficiency, which is called as labor mix variance, labor sub efficiency, or you can also call labor yield variance as well. In that variances also we have to consider actual hours worked. Okay, but in case of labor rate variance, we have to take the total hours. You can just call them actual hours. Okay, so standard rate minus actual rate into actual hour, standard rate minus actual rate into actual hour. The same thing goes for all three. Okay, so once we do that, we'll get this. That is, for skilled labor, we'll get 104 favorable. For semi-skilled, we'll get 32 adverse. And for unskilled, we'll get 24 favorable. Once we are taking the net effect, we'll get 96 favorable. So we are over with the three variances. Now we are going to the branches of labor efficiency variance. So labor sub-efficiency variance is what we are going to calculate next. So as I've told you, we have to consider actual hours worked for labor efficiency, labor sub-efficiency variance, and labor mix variance, because this both are the branches of the labor efficiency. We are considering actual hours worked in labor efficiency. Thus, we have to also consider actual hours worked for these both as well. Okay. So now we are going to calculate sub-efficiency variance. So for that, there is a formula. Let's see, for sub-efficiency variance, total standard hours minus total actual hours into average standard rate. Okay, so total standard hours, that is 768 hours. Total actual hours they are asking. We have to take what? We have to take total actual hours worked. Okay, so that is 760 hours. That will make 760 hours. So 768 minus 760 into average standard rate. Average standard rate means we have to take we should take weighted average. So we have to take 3072 divided by 768. So that is exactly what I have did here. Total standard hours minus total actual hours worked into average standard rate. So we'll get 32 favorable. There is another option as well. You can also opt to do labor yield variance. That is what it is calculated in our study mat. So let's see how labor yield variance have to be calculated. See here, standard output from actual input minus actual output into standard rate per unit of output. So let's see. First, we have to calculate standard output from actual input. Standard output from actual input. So let's see how it is to be. Standard output from actual input. As I have told you, standard output for both standard and actual, will be taking the production as the actual production will be taken for the standard as well. So we are considering that the standard, by using the standard hours, we will be making the actual production. That means 960. So 960 units is the actual production. So we are saying that this 960 units were actually made in the 768 hours, 768 standard hours. We are just multiplying it with the actual hours worked. We have to know what might be the answer. We are going to do that within 760 hours. We have to know how much units we'll be able to make. Okay, so that is what we are calculating here. Standard output for actual input. So actual input means the actual hours worked has to be considered here. Okay, if there is no case of idle variances and all, there is no concept of actual hours worked as well. You can just calculate the way it is. Okay, there is no complications there. But if there is an idle variance in the question, if there is a point of idle variance, then there is a bit of complication. You have to keep a note there. So we are going to calculate in this bracket. Inside this bracket, we are actually calculating standard output from actual input. So once we do this, we'll end up getting 950. Okay, and minus actual output. So actual output means 960 units is the actual output, we already know. So 950 minus 960, you will get negative 10. Okay, now we have to multiply it with what? We have to multiply it with standard price. We can say standard rate per unit of output. per unit of output we have to know, standard rate. So 3072 is the standard amount. We have to get to understand standard rate per unit of output, so we are dividing it with 960 itself, the actual output. So we'll get for one output, what is the standard rate for one output we'll get. So once we are multiplying this negative 10 with this amount, we will get 32 favorable. So the thing is, if you are going to calculate labor sub-efficiency variance, or if you are going to calculate labor yield variance, the answer for both will be same, will be one and the same. So you'll be asking me, the answer is negative 32 and why are you writing favorable? Let me explain. If you are going to take only 760 hours, we will make 950. Okay, so they are saying that here we have calculated, if we might have taken 760 hours instead of the 768, what might be the units, what might be the standard output we'll get from actual input. So that was 950. But actually we made 960 units, which is actually a thing. In labor yield variance, we are calculating the yield. If the yield is more, then it is a favorable case. So here 950 and here 960. In actual case, we ended up making 960 units, which is a favorable thing, because here we are when we calculated standard output from actual input, we only got 950 units. But we ended up making 960 units, which is actually a favorable condition. So that is why we are putting favorable here. So for both labor sub-efficiency and labor yield variance, we'll be having this one and the same answer. So there is only one need to calculate any one among them. Okay, there is only need to calculate any one among them. In our study mat, for this question, they have calculated labor yield variance. That is your choice. If the question is particularly asking for this, you have to calculate that. So it's better if you know how to calculate both of them. Okay, so that is how you calculate labor sub-efficiency or labor yield variance. Now we are going to the final one, that is labor mix variance. So for labor mix variance, how we are going to do it, let's see. So for that, we have to take revised standard hours minus actual hours into standard rate. Here actual hours, we will be taking actual hours worked, since it is a branch of what? Labor efficiency variance. So that's why we'll be taking actual hours worked here, and we have to calculate what is the revised standard hours on the basis of this actual hours worked. So let's see. So first thing we have to do is to calculate the revised standard hours. So let's calculate that first. So we know that this is the actual hours worked, 494, 152 and 140. I'm just keeping it aside. Okay, so let's calculate revised. Let's calculate revised standard hours. So when you are asking me what is revised standard hours, to put it simply, let me say it is actually dividing this 760 hours. We are going to divide them in the ratio of standard hours. We are going to divide that 760 in the ratio of standard hours. So let's see. So, 760 divided by 768 into 384. 384 divided by 768 is a ratio of standard hours. In case of skilled labor, that we are going to multiply with 760 in order to divide the 760 as per the standard hour. So, we'll get 380 hours. In case of semi-skilled and unskilled, we are having the same data. That means, if you're going to take a look at here, 192 hours is a standard rate. So we'll be taking 192 divided by 768 into 760, which is actually same for both semi-skilled and unskilled. So I'm only doing one calculation here. So we'll end up with 190 hours. Okay. So this is a revised standard hours. So what is the actual hours we are going to take? We are going to take this actual hours worked itself. Okay. So revised standard hours minus actual hours worked into standard rate. The same going for the all three. So once we do this, we'll end up with 570 adverse, 121.6 favorable, 212.8 favorable. We are going to take the net effect and we'll get 235.6 adverse. So we have calculated all the variances, all the necessary variances. Now let's reconcile. Now let's just check whatever we did, we want to check if it is right or not, right? So let's see. Once we add these both, we have to get this efficiency variance. Then our answer is right. Okay, so let's see. 235.6 adverse plus 32 favorable. We are getting 203.6 adverse. So that is right. Now let's calculate all these three together and see if we are getting 280 hours. Okay, so 203.6 adverse plus 172.4 adverse plus 96 favorable. See, we are getting 280 adverse. So the answer which we have got is right. Now the final doubt you might have is the answer which I have displayed and the actual which is there actually in our study mat is different. So in case of study mat, I have to say is that they are actually not following a constant method. That means we'll get a bit of confusions when we are going to follow a study mat. So that is a consistent method for me to calculate. But if you're comfortable with the way our study mat has calculated, then go with it. You shouldn't get confused with my video. Okay, so you have to go with the study mat. It will be easier for you once you are going to solve the questions in study mat, because you already know how to solve them in the way the study mat has done. So I have my own way to solve this question. So that is what I have been following from the very beginning of the variance analysis. So this is how I do the calculations and all. And we have also reconciled and we are getting the right answer as well. So I have got this consistent method and I want to follow it the way it is. So if any of you are having any doubts, you can just come and refer this video. And if you're having any doubts as well, you can comment them below. So that's all I have to say about Caselet 8. So I think this question is clear for you right now. I cannot say the answer which is there in a study mat is wrong. I'm not sure because they are reconciling it in the end part. Yeah. So I'm not sure if it is right to get two different answers. But the thing is that this way of solving the question, I'm doing it for many questions. I am applying this kind of principle in all of my variance analysis questions. Okay, so you can just go through my videos and you'll understand them. Okay, so thank you for watching and rock your studies.